You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Strange New Worlds Season 2 finale, Hegemony. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to stick around. We have your listener feedback from our last episode on Subspace Rhapsody, so this is some good stuff there. We want you to stick around to the end of the episode for that. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends to help us grow our community and reach more listeners of Star Trek fan listeners. And another show on the Star Quest Network you are sure to enjoy, in addition to this one, is Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/mysterious.
Or at mysterious.fm. You should update your script.
I probably should. It's not even a script anymore. I'm not even reading it. It's just coming off the top of my head because I've done it so often. I will change that for the future. So we are talking about Hegemony, which is the final episode of the season, in the 10th episode. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
This week, Nurse Chapel is on her way to her 3-month fellowship with Dr. Roger Corby. She's hitching a ride with Captain Battelle on the Cayuga, and they've stopped at a human colony world that's not part of the Federation. Suddenly, the Gorn attack and destroy the Cayuga and invade the colony. Pike and the Enterprise come to the rescue, but the Gorn have sent Starfleet a message to stay on their side of a line dividing the colony's star system. And the Enterprise can't just beam everybody up because the Gorn are using a combat dampening field to knock out transporters and communications. Pike and the gang defy orders and use stealth tactics to attempt a rescue mission. Pike leads a team down to the planet, where he discovers Captain Battelle and a group of colonists. He also discovers Lieutenant Montgomery Scott, who survived a Gorn attack one solar system over and made his way here. Meanwhile, Spock undertakes an EVA mission to the wrecked saucer section of the Cayuga, which is still in orbit. The plan is to attach thrusters to it to make it fall out of the sky and smash the Gorn dampening field generator. On board the Cayuga, Spock discovers Nurse Chapel, so her plot armor is still intact. But things aren't looking so good for Captain Battelle's plot armor, because she's been infected with Gorn eggs, much to Captain Pike's horror. Once the saucer section smashes into the field generator, communications and transporters are back online. Pike, Battelle, and Scotty beam up, and Battelle is put in medical stasis. Spock and Chapel make an EVA leap off the Cayuga saucer section, and they beam over too. Pike tries to contact Admiral April with critical new intelligence about the Gorn, and April orders Pike's immediate withdrawal from the situation. At this moment, they discover that the remaining colonists and the landing party, including La'an, Dr. Mbenga, and Sam Kirk, have been beamed away by the Gorn. We end on a cliffhanger, uncertain what Captain Pike will decide to do. The end.
Come back next time, in a year and a half or something like that, to find out what happens. Oh, I hate these long cliffhangers.
Yeah.
So when we were kids, we had to wait 3 months. Now it's who knows. So, overall impressions, Father Cory?
I enjoyed this. Obviously, this was more action. This was more kind of, I don't know if you can say closing the loop on the Gorn, but we get to see more about the Gorn. We get to see what it looks like when the Gorn actually do invade, because we've seen colonies that the Gorn had invaded and taken over, but now we get to see what it looks like when they actually do invade, what happens at those times. Of course, it was interesting, it's a colony that was basically a mid 20th century Earth, small town, Main Street,
Colony 1950s.
Yeah, exactly. And they even kind of call it out like, oh yes, they purposely made the colony to look like that. Mind you, even though they've got 21st century side-by-sides, early 21st century side-by-sides, just the little 4x4 carts and things like that. But no, other than those little things that were kind of playing on tropes of Star Trek, it was a lot of fun. It was enjoyable episode and a good setup for a two-parter.
How about you, Jimmy?
Oh, I enjoyed it. It was very different than Subspace Rhapsody, but I expected it to be different, and it is quite dramatic. It's got some interesting possibilities for where they may go in the future. I thought it was great to see Scotty I like the actor who played Scotty. I don't believe that they're going to kill off Captain Battelle. I think that they'll save her in the next episode. Who they might kill off is Pelia, because there's going to be rooting for Scotty to become the new chief engineer. And so they could have the preternaturally long-lived Pelia say, well, everything has to end at some point, and die, and Scotty becomes impressed into service as the new engineer. So that's a possibility anyway. But I thought it was a well done episode. I'm a little bit like, okay, so we have the regular technology failures, but this time I don't mind them because they're due to a combat technique. You are going to want to knock out your enemy's communications and transporters if you're fighting them. So it makes sense that the Gorn would develop something like that, and it makes sense that there would be ways to do that. We can jam radio signals now. Presumably, if transporters existed, we could jam transporter signals too, and you'd want to do that in a combat situation. So that all makes sense to me. I don't mind the tech failures for once. What I find a little cliched is the Pike and team must defy orders to save the day, as opposed to, and they kind of set that up by this is not a Federation world, but still, I've seen the our heroes must defy orders trope enough for it to be a little old. So I could have done without that aspect of the show. And the rest of it could have played out all exactly the same. They would still have to get down on the planet in a sneaky way. They would still have to knock out or could have to knock out the dampening field in a sneaky way. All that, could have worked and played exactly the same without the order defying business. It was a dramatic cliffhanger too. And I like that they didn't give us an indication of what Pike is going to do. So that, is a legitimate way to execute a cliffhanger. I've seen others where they do go a little further, and it can be successful, like at the end of Best of Both Worlds Part 1, where Riker says fire. It can also be unsuccessful, like at the end of Under the Dome Season 1, you got a person who's about to be hung from the neck, and someone says, throw the switch, and it's like, that's going to be undone at the beginning of next season. Yeah. So not telling us was fine, and I enjoyed it.
So I also enjoyed it. I understand also why Subspace Rhapsody was not the season finale. It was, they needed to have this cliffhanger, this dark, dramatic thing. Yeah.
Oh, and one other thing, we've got Chekhov's cryo grenade on the mantle. We need to see that used since we didn't get to see it this time.
Right.
And also, when it comes to Spock and Chapel, I totally called it. Last week, you two were like, oh, that relationship is done. That was a goodbye song. They've tied all that up. And I said, I've seen enough soap operas. They can bring that back. They're likely to, and they did.
I think for me, the jury's out. I don't know that it's definitive.
No. I did. They brought it back. Now, whether they're going to pursue it is another matter. But they had them holding hands in this episode and talking about future relationship conversations.
I guess so.
Holding judgment too. So
there's the Roger Corby is also on the shelf. So.
I agree. Their relationship's not ultimately going to work, but I don't think they're done milking it for drama yet.
No, you're right. Yeah. I thought they had definitively done it, with that breakup song. It is weird to bring it back, but we'll talk about it. I'll give my overall impression, which was favorable as well. I like the action. There were the problems. I agree with you, Jimmy. The whole Federation says, Starfleet says, don't engage. No, the Gorn have already declared war. They've they've fired on a Federation starship. That is an act of war. Like the whole they've destroyed our ship, but we're not going to respond. That's an invitation of weakness. And the Gorn are one of these warlike races where clearly weakness is not something they respect. So I thought that was iffy to begin with. Like, you're going to leave your people behind? Starfleet? The Starfleet of this era is very Quisling. It's very, I don't know. I just don't like the Starfleet of this period. The Starfleet command. So that part I didn't like. But I did like the introduction of Scotty. We'll talk more about that. And overall, I'm glad to see the Gorn come back, as the Gorn are clearly the big baddies of Strange New Worlds. Each series has its big baddies. DS9 had Dominion. The Borg was for Voyager. That sort of thing. Whatever the temporal Civil War people were for Enterprise. Discovery was Klingons, and then until they went to the future, and who knows what that is now. And then, but Strange New Worlds is clearly a Gorn series as the big baddies, and I'm here for that, because the Gorn in this are much scarier than the Gorn of the original series. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. So we mentioned the set, Parnassus Beta, made to look at 20th century Midwestern town, which would be almost like kind of like The Village, M. Night Shyamalan's movie, where I don't want to spoil things, but people are living in a village that looks like the 18th century. It'd be like people now going back to live in like an 18th century village, somewhere.
Like the Old West. Like if you built an Old West city somewhere, town around here somewhere.
Yeah, I almost expected in Captain Battel's initial log, this colony has been built on the small cities model, like mid-20th century America, because that's what our budget would allow us to film at.
Yeah.
So if this looked familiar to you, you may have watched the Amazon Prime series Reacher, which this backlot city basically set was the town of Margrave, Georgia, in Reacher.
So that's going back to TOS of using the Mayberry set.
Yes. So the barbershop in Reacher was actually a very important set. So they actually reused that set, the barbershop set, in a very important way in this one too. I thought that was hysterical. So we name checked Corby Fellowship, that Chapel was hitching a ride on her way to Roger Corby. That's why she happened to be here. And then we have this opening, this FaceTime conversation between Battel and Pike that gets interrupted. Very dramatic, the losing the signal and the Gorn attack.
By the way Chapel is traveling is interesting. There's actually a parallel for that in real world military. Mm-hmm. I was reading about it recently in a book about World War II and people's experiences in World War II. And if I recall correctly, that mode of travel where you just take anything that'll get you in the direction you're going is called traveling as a casual. Mm-hmm. And in World War II, traveling as a casual could mean long delays and hardship and so forth. And some people who traveled casual swore they would never do it again. And then they had to.
Yeah. Well, and
right.
today, I mean, a lot of times it's through commercial flight or whatever for military, but there are cases like, say, into an active war zone where you'll fly what they call space available, space A. Mm-hmm. And if there's if there's a C-17 heading where you're going, and I did that actually to get to Saudi Arabia when I was in the Air Force in the 90s. I flew commercial over to Germany and then went to Ramstein Air Base in Germany and then flew a C-17 into Saudi Arabia. And it was with the first C-17 heading that direction. I had to be on it.
Yep.
So same kind of idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to see a great movie that sort of does this, is The Greatest Beer Run Ever, is a movie based on a true story about this guy from New York who wants to bring beers to all his buddies serving in Vietnam, as a show of support. And he's a civilian, but he ends up getting his, talking his way. He's a merchant marine, sailor. He ends up in Vietnam, at the port, and ends up talking his way onto all these planes and all these things going all over the war zone as a casual. People at some point suspect that he's a CIA agent and all this other stuff. It's a great movie. Check it out on Apple TV Plus. But it's a very similar thing.
And CIA agents making extravagant beer runs from Vietnam to Vietnam would not be inconsistent with the behavior of the CIA in that period.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. They were running their own subversive airline. Even
read Legacy of Ashes.
Yeah. So we have this Gorn attack, which really dramatic. The image of the Gorn ship or whatever this thing is that lands. They don't tell us exactly what it is, and that's fine.
It looks like something from Aliens.
Yeah, and it looks like it coming into the atmosphere reminded me of Independence Day. You know, that whole like pushing the atmosphere in front of them, and very dramatic. And
there's very much a lot of, speaking of aliens, there's very much a lot of aliens themes and scenes and things like that in this episode. And the Gorn are great for that. They're a great race for that kind of genre.
Oh yeah, I mean they kind of look a little bit like the aliens from that movie too, with not the head, but the rest of the body.
And they deliberately play on it. I mean, we have those combat scenes on board the Cayuga with Spock and Chapel and a Gorn in a spacesuit, and it's got the tail, and it's like the xenomorph.
Yeah,
this is like combat aboard the Nostromo in Alien, and they even have a moment down on the planet where Captain Battelle and the alien and one of the Gorn come face to face.
Yep.
And the Gorn is like looking right at her. And this is so much like Ripley having a face to face with the xenomorph at the end of the original Alien. It's like, okay, I know where they're getting this.
Yeah. Very, drawn from that. So we have this very weird line in the sand, so to speak, that the Gorn have drawn where the Enterprise can approach the Cayuga's wreck, but they don't, right? It was like this weird, like you can come here in space, but no further. Like it seemed arbitrary.
It was basically between the moon, where the Enterprise was on one side of the moon, and the planet. And most of the wreck was on the side with the Enterprise. But but the debris was then streaming down to the planet as its orbit was decaying.
Right. Yeah, it was I mean, you could say, oh, if they're an alien species, why do they do anything? You know, it's alien. But it just seemed a very odd, like where, you know, we've clearly attacked your ship and your people, but we're going to let you hang around here, even though they're clearly more powerful than the Enterprise.
Well, they understood better than the Federation that Starfleet Command did, that, you know, the Enterprise wasn't going to attack, so the Gorn was safe. All they had to do was just keep the Gorn away, or the Enterprise away from them, and they're fine.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I also thought it was odd that we have this spacesuited Gorn on the wrecked saucer section of the Cayuga trying to do stuff. And it's like, why is it over here? What is its purpose? Why is it doing this? It seemed like it was included just to juice the drama by having a outer space fist fight with Spock and Chapel.
Well, when Chapel first encounters it, she hears it's trying to access the command codes. It's trying to get past the command codes. So to me, it's a logical military reason. You send him over to get military intelligence. You download the contents of the computer. Although you don't send one, you send a team, but backup. So it doesn't happen exactly what happened.
And engineers to take the data system so that you can bring it back and study it at your leisure.
Yeah, that seemed a little weird, but the overall purpose, it made sense to me that doing that on the Enterprise, everybody was chomping at the bit to attack the Gorn in that briefing, including Mbenga, including like everyone wanted to have their slice of the Gorn, and that's when Pike brings out the special package that every ship now carries, Gorn specific weapons.
Crate 32 from Section 31.
Right. I think it's not Lon, but Ortegas, who says break in case of Gorn, which I think is a great line.
Great line.
This is also, notice the similarity to the beginning of Best of Both Worlds as well, where we've encountered the Borg before and they kicked our butt, and so now we have improved weaponry. So just like last season finale, the Gorn kicked our butt, we barely got out of that, Hemmer died, now we've got improved weaponry.
Now, one of the questions someone might ask is like, oh, well, why don't they just make all their phasers like this now? And these are probably experimental. They're probably prototype sort of things. And it's like, don't use these, regular away missions because we don't know if they'll work in all circumstances. But in extremis,
well, and they might be a little bit stronger. That what you think is a stun setting will kill an average person.
Right.
That kind of deal.
Thought that was going to knock him out, not disintegrate him. Oh, well.
Yeah.
They also have recalibrated tricorders that will detect them now, whereas they didn't last season. And they've got nitrogen grenades, which are supposed to be deadly for freeze anything to death within like a 10-meter radius. It's like, okay, we have to see that happen now.
Yeah, definitely.
And you didn't pay it off, so you better in the first episode of next season.
Right. What did you think of them disguising the shuttle as debris from the Cayuga and then flying past the Gorn?
I thought it was fine. The Cayuga would have had shuttlecraft on it that would have been debris after you smashed their ship. So you would expect to see damaged shuttlecraft floating around. I also like number one's line at this point where she says it's an old zombie movie trick. And Spock is like, what? And she says, pretending you're dead so you can pass among them. Haven't you seen one? And Spock says, a zombie? No. A movie? Yes.
I shall endeavor to rectify that or something like that.
Yeah, that was good.
No, it was. I thought the idea of basically letting the shuttle drift, although there's other shows that do that better, where they show it where it's kind of drifting past and not getting seen. But I thought that was a effective way to do it. I love Ortegas's reaction. She's a cloud nine, like, oh boy, I get to do this.
She's doing a hot entry, from the war.
Yeah, and and Pike is getting nervous as they're doing their descent to the planet because they need to look like a piece of falling debris. And Ortegas is waiting until she gets under their sensor level, which means getting very close to the ground before she pulls it up. And Pike is really thinking he's likely to die. And Ortegas is like, don't worry, I did this 100 times in the war. And she's having a blast. And eventually Pike says to her after she pulls it up, you were born to do this, Erica. Yeah. And that's fine in and of itself, but there's a larger pattern. And I kind of noticed that, I kind of commented on this last week. Pike is not heroic enough. In this series. Men in general are not heroic enough. There's this female imbalance on this show, and I can appreciate Captain Pike, like Captain Picard, as someone who is the kind of leader that lets his crew shine and doesn't have to hog all the glory the way James T. Kirk tended to. So I can appreciate that, but Kirk and Picard and Sisko all were heroic and did heroic things. Pike is being written in a way that he comes up short on that. He's in the Captain Kirk role and he's letting everyone do too much. He's a friendly leader. He's a nice guy. Sure, I'd like to work for him, but he's not really the hero in this. And he's been set up as the hero from Captain Pike, he was fleet captain and he's this great hero before his accident. And he needs to be doing more heroic stuff. He needs to you can't just sit back and authorize missions where other people get the glory. He needs to get some glory too. If there is a male character who is getting the heroic, it's Mbenga.
It's Mbenga, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the only one I can think of who's really getting that.
Mike is just a good delegating leader. He leads, but he delegates. No.
which is fine, but it doesn't make him the great hero that we heard about in TOS, right?
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the Ortegas' piloting in, it reminded me of stories from Afghanistan, or it was Iraq. I think it was the Baghdad Spiral, where C-17s and other planes, supply planes coming into Baghdad airport had to do this really steep spiral in so that they weren't flying low over neighborhoods where people could shoot at the planes. Yeah. And it was said to be very exhilarating for the passengers aboard.
You have to do something similar flying into San Diego, not because the people on the ground are going to shoot you, but because, although some of them might in some neighborhoods, but because the skyscrapers. And coming into San Diego airport, you got to fly between skyscrapers.
Wow.
To stick the landing.
Yeah, there's a similar situation in Montana. The airport at Butte points right at the mountains.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine, and those are even less forgiving than a skyscraper is.
Would you want to work in one of those skyscrapers? I don't think I would.
I think it'd be kind of cool to watch them plot, but
I was in Balboa Park in San Diego once. I was out. It was after a dance. I was talking in the parking lot with a friend of mine, and we were watching the planes, which come right by low They come right by Balboa Park for landing. And we saw this one come screaming through the sky, and it's really loud and it's really low. And then all of a sudden it pulls way up and starts getting higher and diverts. And it's like, we just saw an aborted landing. How about that?
Yeah. So around the same time as like the shuttle is heading to the surface, and Una and Spock have this thing about the zombies, there's also this discussion about Spock trying to find Chapel aboard the Cayuga's remains because the sensors are being blocked. And Una tells Spock she would never tell him not to hope for Chapel. And he says, but don't hope.
Yeah.
Right. Basically, don't get your hopes up, but I'm not going to tell you not to hope. And she says, he says, all things seem trivial in the face of death. And that really resonated for me, reminding me of Search for Whales, where he says there how we face death is as important as, I forget what was it important as, but the
how we face life.
I guess it was how we face life. And the Spock and his relationship with death, shall we say, is an interesting journey that he goes on over the next 100 years or 50 years or whatever of his life that he goes in. And it's interesting to see them introducing him talking about these concepts now, that will become such important to his character later.
I love the moment at the beginning of Search for Whales or it's during the course of Search for Whales, where McCoy turns to Spock and says, so tell me what it's like being dead. You really have gone where no man has gone before. Yeah. And Spock is like, well, since we didn't share the experience, we don't have a common frame of reference. I can't describe it. And it's like, okay, you can do better than that. In fact, in parapsychology, there's lots of accounts of what it's like. But still, I appreciated the line.
Yeah. I think he was just tweaking McCoy.
Oh, yeah. Because technically they did kind of share the experience, since Spock's Tatra lived in McCoy.
That's right. So on the surface, La'an is the only one who's faced the Gorn on a
personal level before.
I mean, they've all faced them, the baby Gorn, but not the adult Gorn. But she notices that the Gorn aren't fighting for dominance like they usually do. They're working together, and they leave that thread open. Hopefully we'll find out later.
The reason, so it's Gorn infants that are hungry, and when the food is gone, they should be fighting each other for dominance and consuming each other, and they're not doing that. They're cooperating, which is abnormal behavior for young Gorn. Whereas older Gorn obviously cooperate in various situations, or they wouldn't have spaceships.
Right. So that's another thread that I hope we get closure on in the next season.
They also imply that Gorn's life cycle is somehow related to stellar activity. That if stars act up in certain ways, it's going to prompt certain behavioral responses on the part of the Gorn. And this is part of the critical intelligence that Pike needs to get back to Starfleet, so that they can figure out how solar cycles interact with Gorn biological cycles and possibly use that against them.
Right. Critical intelligence. Yeah. They also
which may be part of the solution to the cliffhanger.
Right. They'll do something to the sun to cause it to, make them hibernate or something. So there's also a line on the planet that brings up hope again, which I think is very interesting, where I think it's Pike who says hope is a choice we make. So hope has become an important element in this story, that he's hoping to find Batel at this point. Spock is hoping to find Chapel. They're hoping to find survivors of the attack. So this hope is big in this episode.
I like the way they did that line where he says it. He's like, as I've told you before, he says it. And La'an says, yeah, I know. He goes, no, I was kind of more talking to myself.
Yeah.
Kind of reminding himself that he needs that hope too.
So this is about the point where they get stuck in the Gorn trap that Scotty has set. And we have this introduction of Scotty. How do you feel about Scotty showing up in Strange New Worlds?
I'm fine with it. I expected it to happen at some point anyway.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I don't know. Like, If it's going to be that, we know he's going to replace Pelia. How that happens is going to be interesting to see. I don't know necessarily, as like you said earlier, Jimmy, that she's going to die. I don't know necessarily that that's going to happen.
It may not.
That's one way they could do it. Another way could do it of, okay, I've had my fill adventure. Now I'm going back to Starfleet Academy for another 100 years or whatever. But there's ways they could do it. But I do. It is clear that they are setting it up where Scotty is going to join the Enterprise either in season 3 or later on, and they're just introducing him now.
And the fact Pelia has said that he was one of her best students could be a motive for her to say, okay, one of my best students is here now. I'm going to go back to the Academy.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually that plays off something she said before where Hammer, he was one of my best students. No, I'm just saying that because he's dead. He was really just kind of an okay student.
Right.
But with Scotty, she says, one of my best students with the worst grades.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't very good at schoolwork, but he was her best student. So
there's ultimately, so this is the 5 years immediately preceding Kirk's 5-year mission. So what they're going to do over the course of this series which is presumably they're planning on 5 seasons. Over the course of those 5 seasons, they're going to gradually introduce all of the regular characters that were there at the beginning of TOS. So we can expect Gary Mitchell to come in. We can expect Elizabeth Daner to come in. We can expect Sulu to come in. Mm-hmm. And we've already got the others, except for Chekhov, who didn't come in until 2nd season of TOS.
Dr. Boyce would be the other one.
Oh, no, Dr. Boyce was previously served because Dr. Boyce was in the menagerie, and that's in our past.
Was McCoy in?
Oh, McCoy will need to show up too.
Okay. Because right now, I mean, apart from Sulu and McCoy, we've got the whole regular main cast already.
But now, we also need to have Mitchell and Daner come in.
They could introduce Chekhov because it was implied in Star Trek 2 that Chekhov was on the Enterprise when Space Seed occurred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They could bring him in too. Whether they will because of Anton Yelchin's death, I don't know. But they could.
Yep. Yeah, that would be interesting. Someone said that they felt like Scotty was too young, that because James Doohan at the start of TOS was about 35, and this guy, as a young lieutenant, looked younger.
Little older than that because he served in World War II.
I think I looked it up. He was in mid to late 30s, I think, at least.
I thought he was early
late
40s.
Really? Okay.
So because Star Trek was 24 years after World War II ended.
Yeah.
So if you figure 18 plus 24.
And Kirk was older. Kirk was 35 in the original series, and it was implied Scotty was older than Kirk.
That's what it is. He was in his mid 40s, and this guy is in his mid 30s. Yeah.
Yeah. Having said that, MST3K mantra.
Yep.
Right. That's what I said to others. Is I'm okay with it.
I think he played
everything
the
has
part
changed.
well. And by the way, this is the first Scotsman to play Scotty.
right. Because who played him in the Kelvin was
Simon Pegg.
Simon Pegg. Yeah.
Who's English?
Oh, yeah. Who was okay as Scotty, but yeah. James Doohan was served in the Canadian military in the World War II in the 1701st Artillery of the Canadian Army.
Realize that. That's fine.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I just hope this Scotty isn't inventing interstellar transporters at warp.
Right.
I don't think I worry about that.
That's just vastly too powerful.
Yes. But this one, I mean, he's already showing his resourcefulness. He was serving aboard this ship, the Solar Surveyor.
The Stardiver.
Yes.
Yep.
And figured out a way to, evade the Gorn by being on this shuttle with a Gorn transponder system, which is sure to show up again in the next season.
Because they made a big point of taking it.
Right. It was interesting that, they show the shuttle coming down and it's just like, is that one of ours? And it wasn't. You were thinking, okay, this is one of the Cayuga shuttles, the first, when it first got shot down, but it wasn't. It was him crashing.
Oh, in the opening. Yes, that's what that was. Okay. I didn't make that connection. So far he's figured out how to overclock the engines on on his shuttle. He created a sensor mask for humans, created a Gorn trap, built a Gorn transponder. Scotty is going full tilt Scotty.
Yeah.
So far.
Survival makes you want to do things like that.
Yeah. I mean, this was always the thing we loved about Scotty, is he could always make it happen. Yeah, so that was good. What did you think about using the Cayuga's saucer section to crash it into the transponder device, the interference device?
I like the plan. That's fine. I like using blunt force trauma to take out a thing instead of just doing some technobabble thing. I like the idea of putting thrusters on the Cayuga saucer section to nudge it in a way that looks like it's happening naturally. Mm-hmm. I did have a question. I thought this was a bit of a flaw where, so they've got the Gorn there just so Chapel and Spock can have a fight with it. And that's the real reason it's there. Mm-hmm. It's not because it's necessary for some strategic reason, although there's they've given it one, but it's the real reason it's there is so we can have some drama with Chapel and Spock. And they want that to occur for some reason in the bridge of the Cayuga, so they have to place a thruster in the bridge inside. Now that kind of works because the view screen is blown out, so the thruster can expel reaction mass out the front of the ship. It does give us a nice. This is wonky, from a physics perspective, but I mean, it kind of could work. It would work better if this was a reactionless drive. If they had reactionless drives, they could put them anywhere they want. They could put them inside, and because they're not expelling reaction mass, it would make sense. But I guess they want the Gorn. I guess the writers may not know about reactionless drives, and also they want the Gorn to see the reaction mass, like venting oxygen or whatever, pushing the saucer section. Having said all that, this does give us a nice moment where during the fight, Spock's phaser has been knocked out of his hand, and it's starting to float out what used to be the view screen, and Chapel has to go after it, but because no gravity boots, she has to, and the gravity is offline, she has to catch the railing with one of her feet to keep her from flying out. And then she's got to do this reachy, try to get the phaser thing. And it's a nice dramatic moment, even though it could be handled multiple other ways, given the technology they have, including a line from 4 episodes back. We have jetpacks.
Yeah.
Right.
And they do eventually show that when they leave the ship. But I got, they call them like retro rockets or something like that. But I got the feeling they were more like reactionless drive, But
although when they fired, they saw something coming out the back. So.
Oh, did you? Okay, I must have missed that because I think it that would make sense to me too. Of putting it on the bridge, inside the bridge, if it was reactionless. If there was no actual thruster. But,
We should probably explain what reactionless drives are for people who may not be aware. So the way a normal rocket motor or thruster works is it operates on the principle of reaction. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, as Newton told us. And so what you do is you throw something out the back of the rocket motor, and that pushes the front of the rocket motor forward. So that's how a standard rocket motor works. You throw stuff out the back, and it pushes it forward as the equal and opposite reaction. But in science fiction, there are reactionless motors where you can get motion out of the system without throwing any mass out the back of it. And
that's how warp drives supposedly work.
Yeah, the warp drive would be one example of a reactionless motor, but there are others, including what's known as the M drive, which is a real-world test device that NASA is seriously investigating. For many years, people said reactionless drives won't work because they violate Newton's laws, but they've developed a theory using electromagnetic radiation where you bounce the radiation around inside the drive, and it somehow pushes the drive forward. And they got some preliminary results that, even though we don't have a theory to account for exactly why this should work, they got enough data that NASA's actually testing the EM drive now. So we may have reactionless drives in the near future.
Interesting. Another aspect of this whole thing is the notion that only Spock can, again, we need to get Spock over there. Only Spock can be precise enough.
That went by way too quick. They needed to justify that more.
Yeah. Because don't tricoders work? Computers tell you exactly where to place it on the hull?
Place your device now.
Yeah. I saw people online why he can't handle, he's the only one who can handle the conditions or whatever. And the idea was he's supposedly the only one who can fly over, plant him in the exact locations, to the inch, and then fly back.
Yeah. Although doesn't even need to be that precise either, but maybe, but who knows?
Yeah. They could have handled that better without it must be Spock. I mean, number one is in charge. Yeah. She knows Spock has the hots and is desperate to find out if Chapel's okay. Yeah. Just Mr. Spock, you're assigned.
Right.
By the way, we should mention, other than the Gorn, Chapel is the only person that survived on the Cayuga, at least that we know of. We don't know if there are other people who were injured, who were burned up in the atmosphere or blown up when the thing crashed, but
that's a
lot of people.
Survived.
If one person survived, the odds are someone else did too. And that's
didn't even mention it. Didn't even mention that there could have been other crew members who went down with the saucer.
Yeah, that's cold.
It was cold, but it worked.
Yep.
So we have finally seen an adult Gorn of this era, as opposed to the TOS rubber suit. We kind of mentioned a little earlier, but what do y'all think of the adult Gorn?
We don't see all of it because it is in a spacesuit.
Yeah.
It's clearly in a suit with a mask.
I like how Spock kills it by smashing its mask.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it suffocates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was. And I like the way it looks so far. I mean, we don't see all of it, but it definitely does look a lot better than the TOS Gorn, that's for sure.
Right.
Low bar.
Yeah,
yes.
I know, right?
Yeah, that is a low bar. And it's less like a beast of the original series one, Arena, whereas this, it's clearly, it's wearing a suit. It's clearly it's space capable. It's clearly intelligent.
It looks more like more lizard-like than the original did.
And it's not wearing that Flintstones uniform that the original Gorn did.
Right, exactly. So back on the surface, they're hiding out in the diner. For some reason, the Gorn. Yeah, I know Scotty is masking their signal, but are the Gorn deaf?
and it's like a barbershop diner. And I just realized here in my hometown in Fayetteville, I was at a gas station recently, and there was a barbershop diner there too. And it was like this one, it was abandoned. But it's like, okay, it's both a taco place and a barbershop somehow.
Yeah.
Well, this was a different place than the barbershop.
They didn't make that clear.
No,
it looked like it was part of the same building to me.
Well, it might have been part of the same building, but it was like right next door.
Yeah, because
those continued buildings, like they built one building onto the next, and so
right. They went from the barbershop to the police station, I think, or the some office where the Gorn trap was, and then from there with Scotty to where the people were hiding out in the diner.
Yeah.
But like people walk around talking, blah blah blah. I'm like, they're the Gorn younglings not coming around.
Well, you got the TV screens on showing to shelter in place and all that kind of stuff. And
interesting. Blood everywhere, showing that there was this massacre. Like there's like sprays of blood all over the place. They don't talk about it much, but you get the clear sense. What they say, like 5,000 people,
5,000.
and maybe the only people left is this handful in this one room.
And they must have gathered them together before slaughtering them, which might be why they're hiding here. Because you don't get that much blood. A human has like between 1 and 2 gallons of blood.
Yeah. So,
I think we have like 5 quarts or something.
Yeah.
Right. Pike and Battelle go with Scotty to his crash shuttle to get the Gorn transponder. And you mentioned, Jimmy, that they're confronted by this Gorn youngling who gets right in her face and doesn't attack, at which point surely you guys had the same thing. Oh, she's impregnated. The instinct is not to attack.
Right. I have my notes say Battelle, alien face to face, Ripley, and then on the line under that, Battelle is carrying Gorn offspring.
Right.
So saw it immediately.
Which I
did like when the Gorn was looking at her and Pike was reaching for the gun, immediately it looks at him, and he's like, "Oh no, never mind, not doing anything over here."
Yeah, don't look at me. And then it runs off, and we know, we've been told it's there's no cure for it. It's fatal every time. That's what we've been told. This was the hammer thing.
Yeah, but
earlier.
we got upgraded weapons now.
And
so they
did say that Pike did say, Hammer didn't give us a chance to try to figure it out. He just assumed and jumped.
Yes. So they will beam her up and put her in stasis until we figure out the. And that's the thing. Is like Jimmy, you said, like you think she'll survive. I agree. Like once she's on the Enterprise, she's going to survive. The way she would, if she was going to die, she would have died on the surface in a self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
But we've already done that with Hammer.
Yeah, that was, I have Himmer as one of my notes, meaning how are they going to differ this from what happened with Himmer? Because having the same kind of death in both season finales, that's too repetitive. They wouldn't do it that way. They need to change it up somehow.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely, I agree. Yeah.
There was one thing that was kind of an inconsistency, at least where I saw it, where when Chapel woke up, she was holding her hand like her fingers were injured.
Yeah.
But then through the whole rest of it, her hands were fine. Like her left hand, she had like she'd turn on the flashlight and she kind of did it weird. And I don't know if she was holding something. I missed that. But they were very inconsistent because then, of course, she immediately goes to sickbay afterwards and starts working using both hands. Like,
she may have waved something over her hand to fix it. I don't know.
That's true.
But even on the Cayuga, like once she got to the bridge, it was showing no problem. So yeah, I think it might have been a little inconsistency.
One thing I did like about this episode is as soon as communications go down, they immediately start talking alternatives. And Uhura points out we still got line of sight, which means you can use line of sight communications like a communications laser. And unfortunately, we don't really see them doing that because they don't really communicate with anybody until the tower goes down. But Chapel sees the Enterprise and then Spock out from within the Cayuga's saucer, and she pulls up what looks like a flashlight to try to signal them. And it's very obvious this is meant to be a flashlight so the audience will understand what it is and what she's trying to do. But in reality, it's like, okay, I think Larry Niven got this one right. If we have a civilization like this, we're not going to be carrying ordinary flashlights and using them for communication purposes because regular light sucks for communication purposes. It's very short range. Space is very big. What you want is a laser so that you've got coherent light that will travel for a long distance without spreading very much. And so you'd use communications lasers, which have other purposes. You can use them as cutting tools. You can use them as all kinds of things. But you want laser light, not regular optical light. And so her being a physician, she could just grab a medical laser from sickbay and use that.
Except sickbay was
gone.
Well,
she wasn't in sickbay. She was in a quarters. So
she can have it in her medikit that she carries with her.
Yeah.
In an emergency, I don't have a problem with that scene because in an emergency you grab what you have and you use what you've got. So I don't have a problem with that. So as far as with the lights, the thing I thought of was the lights mounted on the shoulder pads, which is like finally instead of the wrist things that Voyager had or carrying it in,
the wrist things were terrible.
Yeah. It was a bad idea.
I understand why they used a flashlight. I would have preferred it if they had. I don't understand why they have an ordinary flashlight on this ship because that looks like a 20th century flashlight. But it's just to let the audience recognize it. I would have preferred if they had used a laser for communication purposes.
Just don't shine it like the cutting laser through the port hole because until you have your suit on, you know what I mean? The other problem is if you're flashing a light out the window, you look at the Cayuga, it's on fire. There's like light everywhere, like sparking of electricity and all this sort of stuff. There's no way you notice it. Another
reason laser light is good because it has unique frequencies.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
in fact, I could interact with this scene by saying, of course you failed, Nurse Chapel. You didn't use a laser. That's why they couldn't detect this.
Right. So, everybody. I like the misdirection of everybody getting beamed up from the surface. You know, the away team and the survivors thinking, "Oh, that's the Enterprise grabbing them," and it turns out it wasn't. That was a nice little misdirection.
Well, and it was funny because they used the sound, but the special effects were very different. There's a greenish blur to the special effects that you don't normally have. So, because when I first saw it, it's like, "Oh, they got him." Oh no, they didn't. And then when I watched it the second time, oh yeah, they made it. They made it clear, but you had to be looking for it.
Yeah.
I picked up on the fact this is a different transporter effect than I'm used to, but I didn't immediately connect it to the Gorn, although the green tinge is meant to signify that.
Yeah. Yeah. So
because special effects artists are racists. Right. Gorn have green skin, therefore the transporter beam has to be green.
Well, the Federation are pink skins, so ours isn't pink. So we have the cliffhanger. You know, when you get the questions, you know, that we're left with, which are: does Pike withdraw? What happens to the crew and the colonists? Does Battelle die? Clearly, you know, my guess, obviously, and it's not a stretch to say that Pike will not withdraw. He may withdraw temporarily, but he'll be back. They'll rescue the crew and the colonists. Battelle won't die. And the big question is, will Battelle die? And my guess is Battelle won't die. But what do y'all think?
Well, they have to rescue Mbenga because he's in the original series. Yeah. So he's got plot armor.
Yep.
I think we'll have the big rescue episode, and it'll probably be some of the colonists will get lost, but eventually they'll rescue some of them, and the crew of the Enterprise, at least those who are returning next season. This could also be if La'an doesn't want to come back next season, then she'll be one of the casualties.
Right.
Even if she survives, they could ship her off for medical treatment or something.
Yep.
Also, so if they use the sun to put the Gorn to sleep, which seems like they're setting us up for something like that, it's going to really echo Best of Both Worlds Part 2, because that's what they did to the Borg.
I wonder if it could be to sleep, but it could also be to just withdraw or, you know,
mate.
Yeah, something distracting, which is which would that would be.
Well, it could be that it basically made it sound like the CMEs caused the Gorn to go into their feeding frenzies, to seek out their new prey, and so maybe it's the opposite thing where they go docile, maybe not asleep, but docile.
Right. So that's the end of this episode, and I wanted to, you know, and the end of the season, not series, thank God. But
one more thing before we do that.
Okay.
We talked about it briefly, but I really do like the idea of the interference field generator. You've got a race that they communicate by line of sight. They've already established that. They don't use radio communication. They communicate by line of sight. And so they have a device that basically just wipes out all radio frequencies. Nothing that operates over a radio frequency, like the transporter, like the comms, like the sensors, wipes it all out because they don't need it.
Because they don't. Right. That's a good point.
It's just kind of like, okay, you guys rely on this, so we're just going to take away your ability to do anything, and we'll operate just fine.
I suppose if like you were a race that was deaf on a battlefield, you would just have like noise generators as loud as you could possibly make it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I was going to say, thank you for that. But I was going to say, with the end of the season, we can look back and, you know, talk about the season as a whole. And what's your assessment of season 2 of Strange New Worlds, Jimmy? What did you think of the season as a whole?
I enjoyed it as a whole. You know, I thought there were ups and downs, but I enjoyed it. I particularly enjoyed the more comedic episodes. I really like those old scientists. I like Subspace Rhapsody. There are things I would have done differently in both of those. I would have leaned more heavily into both of the concepts they were exploring. There were other episodes that I wasn't as wild about. The Ad Astra per Aspera trial episode I liked on the whole. I thought that Legal solution was nice, that they actually walked us through the procedures and established a plausible basis, given their own law, for how to let number one continue serving. I thought it was crazy as heck, but that's how lawyering can work. You just got to give the judges an excuse legally to do what they want to do anyway. And that's frequently a successful legal tactic. So I guess those were my impressions overall. My criticisms, I mean, I have individual episode criticisms, but an overall criticism, as I mentioned the last couple of episodes, is there's, even though it's nowhere near as bad as Discovery, there is a Hollywood agenda that is distorting the writing. And in particular, it's distorting it in subtle ways that you may not pick up on initially. But the male-female imbalance on the show is really showing, where, with three exceptions, like, all of our main characters are women, and the heroic lead, the cis white male guy, is giving all the glory to everybody else, and he's not living up to the hero role that we've been told he has. So I think there's some politics distorting the writing in a negative direction. Individually, that doesn't result in a lot of negative stuff. It's on a fairly subtle level, but I think they need to be a little less ensemble. They need to introduce more males into the ensemble. Losing Himmer was and having him replaced by Pelia was shifted the balance even further in the female direction. I think they need to reestablish some better balance, and I think they need to concentrate more on our core three. I think Pike and Spock and number one need to have bigger roles, and in particular, I think Pike does, and number one to a lesser degree. Number one had a bigger role at the beginning of this season, but she's kind of faded into the background more. And she's the first officer, and the first officer and the captain are significantly absentee compared to other characters. So I think they need to build those two up more.
Father, your assessment of the season?
I did enjoy the episode, the season. It was, even for the episodes I didn't like, they weren't bad episodes. It was more of a measure of taste than it was, like the two episodes that I think I was the least positive about was Ad Aspera per Aspera, the legal episode, and Subspace Rhapsody, because, as I said, I am not the biggest fan of musicals. So I mean, but again, that's a matter of taste. That's not a matter of they were bad episodes, that they were badly done or anything like. No, they were good episodes. They just weren't my taste of episodes. Looking at the list, the one they covered some things that I thought were really very well done. Concepts that were really well done, like Under the Cloak of War, where they talked about the issues of PTSD and, things that happen in war, issues of violence and stuff like that happen within war, and forgiveness after the war and stuff like that.
I want to chime in on that and just say I agree. Under the Cloak of War is the best battlefield episode of Star Trek we've had.
Yes, I agree. No, and I agree. And again, as a veteran who, thanks be to God, never actually fought, I was just, I served, but I didn't have to fight in war. I am aware of some of the issues that our soldiers are dealing with today, our veterans are dealing with today. And it was great to see that brought up in Star Trek in such a excellent way. Even the time travel episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow was a good time travel episode. It was actually well done.
That was fun.
It was a fun episode. It was well done. So I really enjoyed that. This was a good conclusion. Hegemony. I keep wanting to say hegemony, but I know hegemony is how you pronounce it. But it was a good conclusion to the season. They did a very good job with the season all in all. I do agree with Jimmy that the big three need to get more screen time. Spock and number one and Captain Pike, especially Captain Pike. He does. He is such a likable character, and he is such a likable leader. But yeah, the issue of, he is supposed to be this great hero, and he does show heroic aspects, but it's not like the forefront of his character. And I would like to see more of that going forward as well.
I'd also like to see more number one. She feels underdeveloped at this point.
Yeah. She's fun. She's a fun character. I really like number one.
So for me, the very close in agreement with you guys on almost everything. Is I think there wasn't a bad episode this season. I think every episode was at least good. I liked some better than others. Broken Circle, which didn't have Pike at all, it was maybe my least favorite of them.
Which was that one again?
That was the season premiere where Spock had to hijack the ship to go rescue Lon. It was okay. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it just was. If I had to pick my least, that might have been that one. And
the Vulcan engagement party episode was fun.
That was very fun. Yeah, like those were good. Among the Lotus Eaters was also not one of my favorites, but still some good stuff there.
Very disturbing. Not what I expected from Lotus Eaters.
Yeah,
right. Under the Cloak of War, I'm in agreement. Probably one of the best episodes of Star Trek, I think, for me. It just stands out. The quality of the acting and writing in that one was outstanding. The overall, it was kind of odd that the Gorn only showed up again at the end in Hegemony, which felt kind of odd given the way they built them up in season 1. But season 2 was. They took season 1 and they went to the next level. I really like it. I like the introduction of Pelia in this season. Interesting character. She didn't get an overwhelming amount of screen time, which is fine. She's the chief engineer. It shouldn't necessarily. But I think they did fine with that one. Overall, I'm happy with the way the season went, and I think I'm looking forward to season 3 to see where this continues to go. I did want to mention when you're talking about like the being Pike light, not getting enough Pike. Spock is getting probably the most development of anyone in this series. And then maybe Uhura second in that, which is kind of interesting. So
Chapel 2.
Yeah. And then you got to throw Lon in there because she's getting a lot of time. And it's kind of interesting because you've got all these secondary characters. I mean, Spock arguably is the most important of them all, of those characters. But we really need to get more Pike. And I know that the reason Pike wasn't in it as much, especially the early part of the season, was because Anson Mount's wife had a baby and he was taking some paternity leave. But nevertheless, we've got to get more Pike into this, and we've got to get him more deeply involved in the heroic level. I agree with you both on that.
I've got a fever, and only cures for more Pike instead of more cowbell.
So that's our discussion of Hegemony and our discussion of season 2. And now let's move on to our listener feedback, which came in on our discussion of Subspace Rhapsody. Our first feedback comes from Rogerio on Facebook, who says,
I believe it's Rogerio.
Sorry. Yes, Rogerio. This entire episode was silly, cheesy, and utterly ridiculous, and I loved every moment.
Me too.
Me too. Our second comment comes from Donna on YouTube, who wrote, when we were discussing musical Star Trek, what about TOS The Way to Eden? That had several songs. Yay, brother.
That episode does not exist.
Yeah.
And it's not, there's a difference between a movie that has people singing in it and a musical.
Right.
And that's a TV show that has people singing in it, but that doesn't make it a musical.
We did discuss, Uhura singing to Spock, and and that sort of thing too. So, there was also songs.
The space hippies, Herbert. Yeah.
Yeah, Herbert's. Oh, that was a very 60s episode. So another thing that came up on our Discord, there was an extended discussion. I'm not going to rehash the whole thing, but I want to mention some discussion of how we approached Subspace Rhapsody, where we got into some deeper discussion of the various plot lines and that sort of thing. And I'm going to read the last comment from the person who brought it up, A. Minix, on our Discord. And we can discuss that. And so they say, I understand that others approach this episode differently than they do. That's why I was giving my opinion. I don't think the episode is only about the songs, but primarily about the songs. The songs make or break the episode. Agreed. There is a story, which I appreciate, and I admire how they were able to weave it in with the music quite well. And there are larger tie-ins, which is why I thought this felt like a season finale, something you also mentioned, because it tied up a lot of plot threads. My appreciation for the songs takes all of that into account because many of the songs make no sense and lose most of their emotional punch without what has happened throughout the season. I'm not saying we should take the music out of context. I guess my point is that we ought not to worry about whether the genre of music Uhura sent into the Subspace Fold was the same we got back, or whether the rules of musicals were followed and such. That was the origin of my original nitpick comment. I withdraw it and substitute and said, sweating the details. And so I would, to clarify, Aminix was saying that we spent too much time sweating the details or nitpicking Subspace Rhapsody in our discussion. So what do you think?
Well, so I think that's, I mean, it's well, number one, this is a review show, and we just review episodes and talk about what struck us. And these were things that struck us. Also, there are parallels in other fields. I mean, this is a musical episode. Well, theater critics critique musicals, and they talk about what they liked in the musicals and what they didn't, what they thought could have been better, and we did all that. Other people, and this is normal for every, form of entertainment consumption, different people will be impressed by different things, and that's entirely legitimate. For someone who is more focused on the songs, and that's to them what's most important about this episode, well, that's fine. That's what's important to them. I tend to be someone, even though I like musicals, at least good ones, I also, plot is valuable to me. And I can recognize, I'm a huge Gilbert and Sullivan fan. I can do what number one does. I can sing the Modern Major General song from memory, which I won't. But not now anyway. But I also need plot in Gilbert and Sullivan. And some of the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas are more popular than others for a reason. The Mikado is just genius level plotting. I mean, they have one premise and everything else just unspools from that premise. The Pirates of Penzance is not as tightly plotted as the Mikado, but it's still very creatively plotted, and both of those have great music. On the other hand, you look at something like The Sorcerer, and it's got basically one really good song in it, and other songs are okay, but it's got one that's really good, which is, for those who want to know, it's My Name is John Wellington Wells. I'm a dealer in magic and spells. That's clearly the breakout number from The Sorcerer, but the plot is quite simple and not overly interesting. And theater critics will point these things out, and in fact, they did point them out in Gilbert and Sullivan's own time. There, if you've ever seen Topsy Turvy, which is a biopic of Gilbert and Sullivan, which is not a comedy. At one point, Gilbert's reading a newspaper, and it's got a review of their recent efforts, talking about the good and the bad points of their different operas. And I see those good and bad points too. But it's a subjective enterprise. So no pun intended. So if you valued other things and didn't sweat others, that's your prerogative.
Yeah. And it's, I would say again, as someone who's not the biggest fan of musicals, the plot does matter. I mean, it really does, especially in this context, because this is a TV series that uses many genres to tell its stories. And in that particular episode, they chose the genre of a musical, and that's great. But you still need the plot. Because, I mean, if you take a musical and you remove the plot, what do you have?
An album.
A concert.
Yeah.
Or an album. You just have a bunch of music. And, I mean, that's fine. I know people who listen to musical albums where it is just the music from the album. You can get the musical album from this episode on Spotify, I think it is, and Apple and all those other places. So if you want to just listen to the music, that's great. But this is an episode of a TV series where the plot does matter. And so, yeah, of course, we're going to critique the plot. And I mean, I even said during the episode, I felt the plot did a good job of connecting the songs and, and advancing the storyline that they were advancing in the episode, because they did conclude a lot of emotional storylines, or at least advance emotional storylines within the episode. So it wasn't just the music. So, yeah, critiquing the plot, I think, is a legitimate thing to do, especially in this context.
We sometimes get people who say, you guys are new, not just our show, but our other shows in StarQuest, oh, it's too nitpicky. Why are you, nitpicking every bad thing? But what we were doing is it's
because we're bad people. Come on.
and it's fun to criticize bad episodes.
No, well, that is true. But even on the good stuff, we love a thing and we want to dig into it. We want to know more. You know, I mean, if I love Star Trek, I wouldn't do a series about Star Trek if I didn't love Star Trek as a whole. And so I want to get into it. I want to look at it from all angles. It's the same way with, you know, the Lord of the Rings or, you know, or a musical album, you know, that I love. I want to get into it. There are some parts I like more than other parts, but we're also about finding what is good and true and beautiful in things in the culture around us. And so we're digging in, as I say at the beginning of every episode, the hidden layers and deeper meanings. We're looking deeper than the surface. We're looking deep into these things, deeper than some people want to go, which is fine, but that's what this podcast is about. And if we didn't sweat the details, our episode would have been about 10 minutes long anyway.
Yeah.
Let's see. And Dom and I, we talked about Discovery episode or season 4. We did an episode on that. And, you know, we were very clear that we do not like Discovery. Discovery has some very serious flaws. It's got some very serious issues in its message, but there was still good there. And we critiqued what we see as flaws. And we talked about what we thought was good about it. And we suffered through it. So you don't have to, but you know, we took both ways. And I think the three of us would agree that we try to find that balance between what is good in an episode and what is worth critiquing. And we're going to critique what we think is worth critiquing, and we are going to praise what we think is worth praising.
I would not participate in this podcast if I didn't fundamentally enjoy Star Trek. And as part of that enjoyment, I think about it as I watch it. I think about, okay, what's here? What do I like? Why did they do that? You know, and I try to understand it from a writing perspective. And then as part of the writing perspective, how could they have done this better? And so, but that's a tribute to how much I enjoy it, because if I did not enjoy it, I wouldn't be watching it. Just like I didn't enjoy Star Trek Discovery after a certain point, and I stopped watching it. And that's why I'm not in that discussion.
Right. It's, yeah. In understanding where the flaws are, or weaknesses even, helps you appreciate the strengths even more. And I think that's an element of it as well. Anyway, I think that's a good discussion, and I hope I bring that up because I think it's a valuable discussion for us to have every once in a while about why we do the things we do. So that's good. All right. So that will conclude our discussion of Strange New Worlds Season 2. And as we head out, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Lauren N., Father Christopher V., Christopher K., Patrick M., and Father Jonathan S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Hegemony or Season 2 of Strange New Worlds? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can watch The Secrets of Star Trek on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We'll be back next time when you'll hear us discussing the original series episode, Tomorrow is Yesterday. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thank you. Live long and prosper. And why you only calling us when you got your dramas? One of these days we'll repay you, we'll slay you. Gonna draw your last breaths at the end of Harmacless. Your eternal torture is every Klingon stream. You know what I mean, to make your blood scream. Kapla!
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, breaking case of Gorn.